Hey, Mark, welcome to the show. It was way of getting started. Tell us about yourself.
Dude, Brian, I am so happy to be here, man. Thank you so much for having me on. Big fan of the brutal truth about sales, by the way. Thank you very
Cool.
much. So listen, as I said before we got on, I'm from the dark side. I'm from procurement and have pretty much spent my entire career in procurement. Actually started out in sales right at university, paid off all my student loans with commission checks, which was sweet. And then went into procurement almost immediately after that. Spent a bunch of time in the corporate world, and now I'm running my own show. Negotiations Ninja is the training company I own, teaching people how to get better at negotiation, and also run the Negotiations Ninja podcast.
Cool. And what did you buy when you were in procurement?
Oh, pretty much everything. I was on the direct and the indirect side. I bought everything from railway services when I worked in the rail industry to software to consulting services, augmented talent, all that kind of stuff.
Cool. And when you say dark side, why do you characterize it? I look at marketing as the dark side.
Yeah, well, I think it's sort of interesting whenever we get into these kinds of conversations. I think we have a habit on either side of the table of characterizing each other as quote unquote the dark side. So
Yeah.
I like to get that out up front. But I think one of the issues that I see in procurement and sales is that it comes down to understanding each other better, which is why I wanted to have this conversation in the first place, because there are people on the other end of the conversation, right? It's not just them versus us or us versus them. It's about having a real conversation about what we're really trying to do. And essentially, we're trying to get to the same goal, right? We're
Yeah.
both trying to figure out how to make a solution work, how to solve a problem. And we're just coming at it from different angles. I think our interests are actually aligned a lot more than we believe them to be.
And today, who are your clients? Are they sales or are they procurement or are they?
Mostly procurement. So yeah, the vast majority of my clients are procurement teams, Fortune 500 companies. Their teams range anywhere from like 8 people on the small side to 400 on the big side. And so anything from banking to SaaS to railway, those are the companies that I work with on an ongoing basis, teaching them how to get more value out of the conversation.
Now, I sold forever and I never negotiated with procurement. By the time it got to procurement, it
It's
was
a reality now, man. Procurement teams, and I would say like for sure in the last like 5 to 10 years, 5-ish years, procurements definitely increased their influence in the marketplace, and they've just got a significantly larger seat at the table now. So when a lot of B2B salespeople are negotiating now, they're having to deal with procurement at a much earlier stage in the conversation. And the vast majority of procurement people are now coaching their internal business stakeholders to say, look, you need to bring me in early, because when we get to that commercial discussion, I want to make sure that we're getting best value and we're making sure we're making the right decision for the business.
okay. And so, how do you coach people on this? Because
Yeah.
when we be at the table, sometimes procurement was there, but it's much more of an administrative function, making sure it was bought legally.
For sure. And it definitely used to be that way. And now it's more of a conversation about, okay, when we set up the conversation with regards to how we're going to buy something and what we're going to buy, let's talk about how we approach the negotiation strategically, whether or not this overall product and service fits into our category plan. Do we already have like 3 to 5 other things that essentially do the same thing? Do we even need to buy this? Those are really the first questions that we need to ask. And then if we can say, yeah, we actually need to buy this, now at that point, how do we set up the strategy? How do we plan and prepare? How do we ensure that we're ready for the conversation with sales? How do we ensure that we're ready for the conversation around how this fits? And then tactically, how do we now implement that
Yeah.
conversation? What words do we use? How do we use those words, body language, all that other kind of stuff?
But how did you get paid in procurement?
So 2 ways. Number one, salary. And then what a lot of procurement people don't tell you, which is unfortunate, is they get bonused out based on performance. And a lot of their performance is tied to the savings that they would generate.
And how do you judge that?
Based on savings,
Yeah.
year over year, basically. Or if we're going to RFP and you would generate, maybe 3 people, we take the average off of that and then minus that total off of it. That really, depending on the procurement organization that you're working with, we classify it as 2 things. Number 1 is cost reduction. Number 2 is cost avoidance. Cost reduction gets weighted more highly. Cost avoidance gets weighted less highly.
And what percentage of your income was that?
Oh, on a good year, could be upwards of 15%.
Okay, so a little bit of skin in the game, but not
Yeah,
much.
not much. I mean, compared to the sales side, no,
Right.
you guys are killing it when it comes to how you get compensated. There's actually a big discussion right now on whether procurement people need to be more tied to the result and whether their compensation needs to be more tied to the quote unquote savings or value that's generated.
Right, because it's really hard to measure that.
Super hard to measure.
Yeah.
Hard to measure. Yeah.
Right.
Easier, I would say much easier to measure like the revenue generation or the profit generation on the sales side.
But how about the audit? I mean, because that's where I've only seen procurement people get fired over a failed audit versus saving the company any money.
Yeah. I would say within the last few years, our role has changed a lot in terms of the difference between savings and audit. Certainly, and this is where I think you're going, is when we would audit a customer. Is that what you're thinking? Or audit a supplier?
When the company gets audited.
Because, yeah.
Because the classic things of people giving POs to their spouse for nothing.
Yeah, well, listen, we play golf together, so therefore we have to cut the PO.
Well, that's what happened at Facebook. It was a couple $100,000 was paid.
Yeah, hey, listen, that's a big problem. It's definitely reduced a lot, and now with SOX and with a lot of the accounting rules that have come in place, I would say it's pretty rare to see a procurement person in a position where they can actually even functionally carry out any kind of fraud in any kind of way. I would say that the way that the systems have been set up in most organizations, especially with large P2P ERP systems, it's almost virtually impossible for it to happen. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's really difficult for it to happen. So there's been things that have been put in place. And also, I would say now a lot more procurement people are not necessarily getting fired for audit purposes, but they're getting fired for lack of performance. And when I say lack of performance, I mean lack of being able to generate value. And I say value because I want to make sure I differentiate between savings and value. Generate value for the organization.
Okay, so let's say a purchase request hits your desk. It's $100K. How long do you have to issue it?
Depends. So it depends on the need of the business, right? So cycle times from PR, purchase request, to PO, I mean, you should be getting to that within a day, a couple of days, depending on the organization. Now, if and when that happens, I love that you're laughing about this.
Most companies, it was 30 to 45 days they had to, right?
And so it's definitely improved from that point. I would say where you're seeing some of the delay happen is where people say, if it's not like a go-to stock item, for example, then you've got to actually investigate the market. You've got to determine what's going on. You might have to actually go to RFP and see what's available. Yeah. All of that kind of stuff is going to happen. If it's a stock item, it should be almost instantaneous.
Right. But usually, when I tell people, just go to the executive, get it approved, single source justification, issue it. Right. And I'd get the procurement. Oh yeah. How about some resellers? None. I want 5 more points. No. Right.
Yeah.
And we already did it. We already did it with the CEO. You call him, he got his pound of blood.
Totally. And it's, what I would say is that happened a lot in the past. It's not as common anymore. I would say that procurement people are being
I can see in bigger companies,
weaponized, so to speak. Yeah, for sure. In smaller companies, yeah, it definitely makes sense. But when you're talking like Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, that rarely happens.
Yeah. Okay. So you would put it out for RFP?
Yeah, potentially. Or if we have to go and, do a single source, sole source negotiation, now at that point, I would just come in and chat with the salesperson, potentially the operations people, make sure that my people are in the room at the same time and discuss, what scope, how does this work? How does it implement it? Let's figure out the best way to make this happen.
Okay. But the users want it.
Right.
Right. The C-level people filled out the request, the money's allocated. Your
Yeah.
job is to issue it, right?
No, my job is to make sure we get best value. My job is not to issue it. My job is to make sure that the organization's making a good decision, first of all, because just because you want it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good decision.
Right. But who would you report up to? The CFO, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Potentially. Yep.
Yeah. So, and who does the CFO work for?
Yeah, the CEO, but it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. And this is what I think a lot of salespeople don't necessarily understand about how procurement has changed. Just because we want it doesn't mean that it's a good decision. So we have to make sure that we're making great decisions for the organization. And if, for example, you say, hey, we want this brand new shiny software, amazing, fantastic, glad that you've said that you want it, and is it the right decision? So let's determine, number one, is the shiny software the right software that we need to use? And if it is the right software, awesome, let's go now have a conversation. If it's not the right software, how do we determine that? Let's make sure that we actually do a side-by-side, apples-to-apples comparison as best we can to make sure that we're making the right decision.
Okay. So what should the salesperson be doing?
For sure, during this time, the salesperson is trying to solution, right? In my opinion. So they're trying to find the best solution for our needs, which is awesome. We want them to do that. And now we're having a conversation about whether it's a fit. And if it is a fit, great. If it's not a fit, we got to move on.
Right. But who's the challenge I have is how does procurement add value to that? They don't use it. They don't know the industry. They're much more on the administrative side of how do we buy this legally so that survives an audit.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
And we're also trying to make sure that if we're comparing you to another provider, that what you have is better value than the other provider. So right now, if you're coming in to have a conversation with me, it's not just a conversation with you, it's a conversation with 3 to 5 other people.
Yeah.
And when we have that conversation, our goal, our intent is to determine whether the salesperson is telling us that this actually fits our needs better than the 3 to 5 other people. Okay. If it is, awesome, let's go for it. Let's have a conversation about how this fits and we can put together the commercial terms, all that other kind of stuff. If it doesn't, have a great day.
So what was your pecking order of things that you would ask for? Let's say the purchase request is legit. They did their due diligence. There's a business justification for it. They did a market study. They did some kind of RFI, market analysis. They documented it. It's all there, nice and pretty. It's all approved.
How do I rank?
No. What are you going to ask for? You're going to ask for a discount, right?
No, not necessarily. So first of all, I need to know if there's a technical fit, right? So in any kind of comparison that we're doing with any other organization, first, is there a technical fit with the business? I don't get to make that decision. The business gets to make that decision, right? And we're going to weight that on our decision criteria because it's not necessarily just about whether it's a technical fit. Also have to determine, look, does it meet our legal terms and conditions? Does it meet our governance structure? Is our data safe? All that kind of stuff goes into the decision matrix. Then we determine, okay, does the cost make sense compared to the other ones? And so each of those independent line items has their own weighting. And then within that weighting, now we get to decide, just because it's a technical fit doesn't mean overall that it's best value. So we have to take into account all of the additional items that are involved in order to make the best quality decision.
Okay. And then when you meet with the salespeople, what are you asking for?
All of those things. So make sure you
say you got all of those things. Then what do you get? I mean, you
now
got a purchase request. You got to
for sure. Now we get into the discussion about commercial terms, legal terms, all of those things that are involved. Yeah. Definitely. So, when are we going to get the product? How is it going to be sent? When are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? How much does it cost? What are the payment terms? What's the IP look like? Limitation of liability, all of that kind of stuff is part of the conversation.
Right. But you're a negotiation expert. What are you negotiating?
All of those things.
Right. But how many of them are non-standard?
What do you mean? How many of them are non-standard?
Right. You got a purchase request, right?
Right.
You got a license agreement. You got your license agreement, right?
Sure.
Okay. So what do you
So
have?
are we operating off of your paper or my paper? If we're operating off of my paper, then essentially we've got our standard T's and C's. You're
Right.
going to redline that as much as you can, obviously.
Yeah.
And now we're going to start negotiating on what makes sense for the
Right.
organization.
And it always starts there. It's like, you use our paper. No, you use our paper. And I'd say 99% of the time it was, you had to use the vendor's paper. Because
yeah, depending on the product, like you see this a lot in SaaS, for example.
Right.
If you're a large SaaS company, you get to dictate a lot of the time that you're going to be basically sending the paper. If for whatever reason, though, it's another service like consulting, augmented labor, even product supply, we're using our paper. Almost
right. And your paper covers everything.
Yep.
Right. So that turns into a legal job, which the order would have to be significant enough for them to care to invest that legal effort.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. No question.
And those terms, typically everyone starts off crazy and it all comes down to the same thing, indemnification for the value of the deal.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Warranty, indemnification, IP, those are the heavy hitters for sure.
Right.
No question.
So how about price?
Price is part of the discussion, but it's not the entire discussion.
Yeah. But so,
I think that's the clarification I want to make, because I think there's a lot of misconception about how procurement people do their jobs. Price is definitely part of the conversation. I want to make that clear, but it's not the whole conversation.
Right. And how much would you ask for off?
It depends on what the market is. So for example, if I know where your benchmark rates are, then I'm going to try and understand what the market has to offer, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not overpaying.
Okay.
I'm not just going to go in and like pull my finger out of my ass and like throw something at a screen and say,
"Sure, you are." Of course, you are.
No, that's not the way it works, Brian.
I'm for 50% off. Right?
Oh fuck! Oh my goodness!
Right?
Absolutely not. No, it has to determine based on what the market is. Look, if it's software, if it's SaaS, I know that we're not even going to have a real conversation if we're not talking below 50% off rack. Like that's nonsense. First of all, like we all know those prices are made up. Those companies have recovered their cost a long time ago.
Right. There's zero cost.
Right. There's zero cost. Exactly. So the conversation we're going to have at that point is, look, if you're a LinkedIn or a Salesforce or a large SaaS-based organization, and I don't have a lot of seats at the table, meaning there's low volume, obviously my leverage is low. But if I'm a large organization, now we're going to have to start having a conversation about what makes sense. For sure, you're going to make your margin on a lot of the smaller guys. I totally get that. But if I'm representing a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 company, I've got a lot of volume that I can bring to the table. If we're not talking like close to 70, 80% off of a SaaS product, then we're not even in the ballpark.
But you don't have veto power. Meaning,
in terms of making a decision of whether we buy it or not?
Because
no procurement person
right.
does. Yeah. So yeah, first of all, let's be clear. No procurement person in the history of mankind has ever had decision-making authority on what actually happens, but they have significant influence now over what happens. And so how you engage with the procurement person and what you talk about is going to help you build that influence. And I think for a lot of salespeople who are hearing this conversation, one thing I want you guys to be aware of is if you involve procurement early, they can actually be your biggest champions as part of the process. So don't avoid having the conversation. Be part of that conversation with them, because if you can help them get what they need out of the deal, which is not necessarily price, it's about getting best value and proving best value, then you can have a great champion as part of that conversation.
Yeah, well, help us there, because when do you see companies requiring going through an RFI, RFP, formal decision process versus some group wants this?
A lot. So let me help.
But no,
Let
what
me, yeah,
drives it? Not how
what
often.
drives going to market?
Yeah, I mean, because let's say it's a 50K trinket that the research group wants. No one else has it. We need it for some research thing.
Oh, yeah, then who
Right,
cares about
right,
$50,000? I don't,
right.
yeah, whatever,
But then,
right?
is it a
There's a
dollar
certain,
amount? Is it a
for sure,
strategic?
no
Okay,
question. For sure, there's a certain spend level that exists within a lot of organizations. It's totally different based on organizations. So
yeah,
some of the organizations are like $1 million and up. Some of the organizations are like $150,000 and up. So it depends on the size of the organization and really what they're willing to get involved in, because at a certain point it becomes a series of diminishing returns, right, Brian? So you're not going to spend time on something that's super low spend. You're just going to let them, here's your credit card, go buy it, right?
yeah.
You know what you want. You've made a decision. It's super low cost, super low risk. Off you go. But if it's high spend, high risk, if it's a strategic play, then we need to get involved to talk about what the enterprise needs overall. And at that point, then
Okay,
yeah, likely we're going to market.
okay. So let's talk about that because who typically issues the RFI?
The
Typically,
RFI RFP is
yeah,
procurement for sure.
yeah.
No question.
Because I've seen it come through line of business.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and sometimes if the procurement team doesn't have a lot of play in that organization, if they don't have a lot of influence, like there's some tech organizations that have like two guys sitting behind a desk cutting POs, right? And that's fair because that organization hasn't seen the value in procurement yet. And I say yet because there's a lot of value within procurement to make sure that those people understand how to buy better. Now, other organizations, for example, place a lot of value on them because it really takes a lot of the workload off of the business unit and it helps them to make better decisions.
and they don't know how to get it done
They don't.
administratively and
Yeah,
politically.
exactly. Exactly.
So let's say it goes to RFI. You
Hmm.
go into market. You're at least willing to investigate some piece of something.
Sure.
It goes out to how many vendors would you typically choose?
I think if you're going, I mean, it depends. If you're going beyond 7, there's no point.
Okay.
Because doing any kind of cross-functional analysis, now there's a lot of tools recently that help you to do a lot of the analysis a lot faster, but people that are still doing this by hand, if you're doing more than 7, it's crazy. But I mean, if you have a tool like Scout RFP, for example, that does all of the analysis and helps you with that, you can go to much more than that.
Okay. And how? Okay. So it goes out. You get it back. They all look the same, right? Everyone says yes to everything.
Sure.
Everyone knows how to play the game. And what they're looking for is that, what, a demo meeting presentation type thing?
Potentially, right? I
Yeah.
mean, let's say we release it to 7. Now we got to shortlist it to 3 or 2. So we shortlist based on those answers. Now we bring those companies in for either demos or presentations or whatever it might be, additional questions that we have that the RFP couldn't necessarily facilitate. We have those questions, we have those presentations, shortlisted down to 2, and now we're playing a game of one versus the other.
Yeah. And how involved are you typically then?
Big time.
Because I think it's certainly good to have you in there to understand how the company gets things done.
Mm-hmm.
Who's in legal, who's in security, governance, whatever, all those steps to make sure that that's being done concurrently, so that if you get the technical win, getting the business process done isn't, we're doing that. And legal goes, we can't do that. Right?
Yeah, that's why legal needs to be involved in that as well, right? So if I release as part of the RFP our templated terms and conditions and you redline the shit out of it, that's going to be part of the evaluation process where I'm going to be like, well, I mean, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do business with these people.
Yeah. And what is a smart sales rep doing? Because, if you look at it like a commodity, they all look the same. Somebody's got to have an emotional connection to one particular product for some reason, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's forward looking, it's faster, it's easier to use,
Sure.
or they like the people better, or the support's local, or there's some unique thing that company has that the others don't.
Sure. So what's a smart sales rep going to do at that point?
Yeah.
So I'll give you guys a hack that I think all sales reps need to be doing. Procurement, like everyone, wants their job to be made easier. So if you can build with procurement the business case of how you're showing best value,
Yeah.
you've basically done their job for them,
Yeah.
so that they can take that business case and say, best value, here we go.
Right.
And so that they can slide it across the desk, they get high fives, awesome, everyone wins. You need to be a part of that process with procurement to make sure that you're helping them to get what they need.
Yeah. Because if you're in there even earlier and helping them with that, the RFI tends to look like that document.
Oh yeah, no
Right.
question. Like,
Right, because you don't have time to become an
if you can
expert.
get in before they release an RFI, RFP, and you help to guide that process, it's going to be fantastic. Now, if a procurement person allows you to do that, amazing, good for you. That procurement person should probably get fired, though, right? Like,
Well,
because when that happens, what ends up happening is now that RFP is tailored towards what that organization provides, and now we're unfairly looking at the market in a certain way.
But the sales are all, enterprise salespeople don't call procurement. They call who's going to be the end user of the product.
Sure,
because until somebody says to you, hey, we're interested in looking at this, you're like, I'm busy over here. I got other stuff to buy. Right?
Totally. Yeah, and that's why whenever you're developing an RFP, and I think a lot of salespeople maybe misunderstand this as well, and even procurement people, is you're not developing the RFP in a vacuum, right? I mean, you're gonna have to chat with procurement or legal or IT or the business user or whoever it is to make this a document that makes sense. Otherwise, it's just gonna, and you've seen them, it's just gonna be like a mishmash of garbage.
And I've often said to people, if you get an RFP, and you've never heard of the company or you've never talked to them, they're not in your marketing automation, your CRM, you're probably column fodder, or your chances are really low.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're just there to create a benchmark. That's all you're there for.
Yeah, and people get happy ears and they'll hire people to respond to this.
Absolutely. Now, what I will say is that there are industries, and this is totally industry dependent, there are industries that are required to go to market. There are companies that are required to go to market and basically canvas a bunch of different companies to come and put their word in. And they are also required to look at those organizations. So you look at heavy construction, mining, stuff like that, the competition is so low that I promise you're not cannon fodder. I mean, you look at tech though, tech is for sure totally different.
Yeah, tech or professional services.
For sure, no question.
Yeah. And when they call you and they say hey, what are you guys really looking for?
Yeah.
What do you say?
And then we say, thank you, answer the RFP. Right? What do you mean? What are we looking for? Did you read the RFP or not?
But of course, they're all told to do that. Right?
Of course they are. And look, we certainly appreciate that, you're just trying to do your job, right? You're trying to get additional information so you can be more competitive. Totally get it.
Yeah.
We can't give you competitive information that is going to hurt the other organizations that are submitting.
Nor are you going to say, they're going to ask who requested this, what's driving this, what's the why behind this.
Right. And so we can't give that out. We can't tell you that. We can't.
So, but the smart ones won't reply then, right?
Yeah, or we just say no, right? And I think a lot of people need to understand, if you're going in to ask for this, which, I mean, a lot of times you should, right? You should still do that, because there's still going to be people who help you with that kind of stuff. And then they're just going to send out the information to all the proponents that are sending it in so that everyone gets an equal play. If they're giving you that information, they're not sending out that information to all the proponents, they've actually broken the law. So they have to make it an equal playing ground for all the proponents, which is why most of the time they don't give you that competitive information.
Now, when you say what law, is that
Yeah, so
because there are federal acquisition rules.
Totally. So I can't give you competitive information that now makes you more competitive than someone else unless I give them the same information. So what I say to one, I have to say to everyone.
Is telling them what department or who is requesting this or what's behind it? Competitive?
Still, yeah, it's still competitive information, and I
Yeah.
need to release that information to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was on the board of a services company, and they had a whole team responding to these RFIs from people they
Totally.
never heard of from. And I go, so have you won any? They go, no. Will they
Yeah.
talk to you? No. Why are you replying?
Yeah, I mean, you really got to think about the industry that you're in.
Right.
If it's not worth it, like if it's not industry practice to do this, and you're just replying, and your success rate is
Yeah.
0.1%, why are you even bothering?
Right. If you want a helipad, there's probably 3 companies that build helipads.
Totally. Exactly.
You might have a better chance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, where there's a unique and there's only a few people who do it. Cool. Hey, this has been a fun conversation.
I've really enjoyed it, man. It's really, really good.
Cool. Where can people go to follow you and learn more about your work?
Best place to do is on LinkedIn. So you just search my name on LinkedIn and you'll find me there.